The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes each footstep feel amplified in the darkness. The gas station, a small flickering oasis on the edge of the interstate, had long since closed its doors to the few remaining late-night travelers. Inside, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead cast shadows that twisted along the cracked linoleum floor. It was here that Anna and Mark had stopped on their drive back from visiting family, unaware that the world outside was about to change forever. As they pulled their old sedan up to pump number 3, a figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the parking lot. At first, Anna thought it was another driver, perhaps a hitchhiker, or a traveler seeking the same brief respite. But there was something off, the slow, deliberate pace, the way the man's eyes seemed fixed on their car, studying them without any attempt at subtlety. Mark waved, offering a polite nod, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, he continued his slow approach, silent, almost gliding across the asphalt. Inside, Anna noticed his features more clearly. Mid-30s, dark jacket zipped to the neck, hands tucked into pockets, a hat casting deep shadows over his face. There was a coldness to him, an absence of warmth or friendliness that made her stomach knot. She nudged Mark, whispering, "Do you see him?" He glanced, briefly shrugged, and returned to pumping gas, brushing it off as paranoia. But as they drove away, the sense of unease didn't leave. At first it was subtle, a fleeting shadow in the rearview mirror, a flicker of movement behind the trees lining the interstate. Then unmistakably headlights appeared in the distance, behind them, keeping pace as if rehearsed, deliberate. Anna's hands gripped the dashboard. "Marquez, following us," she said, voice tight with fear. Mark's rational mind tried to override the growing panic. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe someone's just heading the same way he said, yet his own pulse betrayed him. There was a tension in the air, electric and almost suffocating. Every curve of the road, every hill crest revealed the same headlights, steady and unyielding. The stranger had transformed from a shadow at a gas station into a predator, shadowing their every move. They attempted to shake him off, taking detours and side streets that they hoped would confuse him, but it was as if he anticipated each move, each turn perfectly. At one stoplight, Anna caught him again, his gaze locked on their car through the rearview mirror. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt, just an eerie, unblinking focus. By the time they reached a small, nearly deserted town 3 miles down the road, the feeling of being hunted had evolved into pure terror. Every light seemed dim, every street too long, too empty, amplifying the sounds of the tires on asphalt and the engine's low hum. They found a small diner with a glowing "open 24 hours" sign and pulled in, desperately hoping for safety, for someone to intervene, for any indication that the world outside wasn't entirely hostile. But as they stepped out of the car, the stranger was already there, leaning against the side wall of the diner, face obscured by shadow, watching, waiting. Their instincts screamed for them to run, to leave everything behind, yet the pull of normalcy, the hope that an occupied diner would offer protection, held them momentarily rooted in place. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting stark, unnatural shadows across the tiled floor. The few patrons glanced up, briefly returning to their food, their coffee, the mundane rhythm of their own lives. But Anna and Mark couldn't stop noticing the reflection in the window behind the counter. The stranger had followed them, silently slipping into the Kung diner behind them, though no one else seemed to see him. Every movement was deliberate, every glance calculated. As he moved closer, the air seemed to thicken, and the diner's walls closed in around Anna and Mark. What began as a seemingly minor threat at a gas station had escalated into a nightmare they couldn't comprehend. And in that moment, neither of them realized that this night would mark the beginning of a series of events that would unravel everything they thought they knew about safety, trust, and the quiet darkness lurking just beyond the edge of ordinary life. The diner's hum seemed louder now, oppressive, like the silence between heartbeats stretched into eternity. Anna clutched her coffee cup as if it could shield her from the unnatural tension creeping through the room. Mark kept glancing toward the door, half expecting the stranger to appear behind them at any moment. Yet every time he turned, there was nothing, only empty booths, flickering neon, and the faint aroma of fried food. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The stranger did not sit. He did not speak. He simply moved from one shadowed corner to another, always just at the edge of vision, a phantom drifting through the periphery. Anna's instincts screamed at her to leave, but Mark's rational side held firm. He can't just appear out of nowhere, he whispered, trying to ground them both in reason, but deep down even he felt the primal fear that this was no ordinary man, no ordinary pursuit. The diner's waitress approached cautiously, her eyes flicking to the corners of the room as she refilled a cup of coffee. "You folks okay?" she asked, voice light but tinged with concern. Anna nodded quickly, trying to smile, but her eyes never left the shifting shadows. The waitress's gaze followed hers, lingering for a moment before she muttered something under her breath and walked away. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the neon sign, and the stranger shifted again, a silhouette visible through the diner's fogged-up windows. Every step he took seemed deliberate, rehearsed, as if the night itself bent to his will. The sense of being watched was unbearable, oppressive, pressing down on Anna and Mark with suffocating weight. Finally, Mark whispered, "We have to leave." Now Anna's heart raced, but she didn't argue. They hurried out, trying to appear calm, to act as if they were simply moving along their journey, not fleeing an unknown menace. The stranger was gone, or at least they hoped he was. As they drove into the night, once more every headlight ahead or behind made Anna flinch. Each sound, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, set her nerves on edge. Mark tried to talk, tried to distract her with mundane chatter, but his words felt hollow against the persistent dread that seemed to cling to them like a second skin. Then, without warning, their car shuddered, as if something had struck it. Mark slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. They both stared at the rearview mirror. Nothing, no other vehicle, no collision. Just the empty road stretching endlessly behind them. And yet the feeling of being pursued had not lessened, it had intensified, sharpened into a razor-edge awareness that something was very wrong. The landscape grew darker, more desolate. They passed abandoned farms and stretches of woods that seemed impossibly still every few minutes. Anna caught glimpses of movement, shapes in the tree shadows along the roadside, but each time she blinked, there was nothing. Mark tried to rationalize it. "It's exhaustion. We're on edge, we just need to get home." But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that some hidden force was orchestrating their every move. Hours later, as the first hint of dawn brushed the horizon, they spotted a small rest area. Exhaustion and fear had made them reckless. They pulled in, desperate for even a brief respite, for a moment to gather themselves before continuing their journey. But as they stepped out, the morning air did little to calm them. There, across the parking lot, the stranger waited, leaning against a lamppost, his silhouette dark against the pale light. He watched them, not moving, not speaking, simply waiting. Anna's breath caught. "He's been here the whole time," she whispered. Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. The realization hit them both at once. This was no ordinary stalking. This was calculated, deliberate, and whatever his purpose, it was far from over. The stranger's eyes, faintly visible beneath the brim of his hat, seemed to bore into them, unyielding. The dawn's light, which should have offered relief, only made him more surreal, more menacing. As they hurried back to the car, their sense of reality began to fray. Every instinct screamed at them to flee, yet the world around them seemed to conspire. Every shadow, every sound, every flicker of movement, reinforcing a truth they couldn't yet name. They were trapped in a nightmare that had only just begun. And as the engine roared to life and they sped away, the last thing Anna saw in the rearview mirror was his figure, standing perfectly still, as if rooted into the pavement itself. A silent promise that this pursuit was far from over. The highway stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the pre-dawn fog. Anna's hands gripped the dashboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mark's eyes darted constantly to the rearview mirror, each flicker of movement triggering a jolt of panic somewhere. Deep inside, they both understood the stranger's presence was no longer just a threat. It had become a predator's game, and they were the prey. Their phones had long since lost signal, leaving them isolated, cut off from the world. Every roadside diner, every gas station, every faint glimmer of civilization was a potential trap. Mark tried to focus, to map out a route that would take them out of this nightmare. But the fog seemed alive, curling along the edges of the road, like ghostly fingers obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Suddenly, the car headlights caught a figure on the shoulder. A man in a dark coat hunched, his face obscured. Heart-hammering, Anna pressed herself into the seat. Mark swerved, slightly instinctive, but the figure didn't move. He just stood there as if waiting. Then, with a fluid motion that was almost too fast to register, he vanished into the mist. "This isn't real," Anna whispered, though her voice betrayed the tremor in her body. "This can't be real." Mark didn't answer. He was too busy scanning every shadow, every tree line, every curve of the road. Something about this stretch of highway, so mundane in daylight, now seemed impossibly sinister. The trees leaned in, their gnarled branches scratching at the wind like skeletal fingers. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Every roadside rest area, every service station they passed was eerily deserted, as if the world itself had gone quiet, holding its breath. And then finally, in the distance, they saw a flicker of neon. A small, isolated motel, its sign humming faintly. Relief surged through Anna, though it was immediately tempered by unease. Felt too convenient, too perfect. Pulling into the parking lot, they saw the stranger waiting there. Not near the road, not near the building, but in the shadow of a dead tree, just beyond the edge of the lot. He was leaning against the trunk, completely still, watching. Anna's stomach dropped. Mark hit the brakes and parked, every instinct screaming at them to leave, yet fear rooted them in place. Inside the motel, the fluorescent lights flickered, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and old carpet. The receptionist, an older woman with wary eyes, barely looked up as they entered. "Need a room?" she asked, her voice flat. Mark nodded, fumbling with his wallet, but the woman's gaze drifted for a fraction of a second to the lot outside. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she muttered something under her breath. Anna caught it. "They never leave." The words chilled her to the bone. "What do you mean?" she asked, but the woman simply shook her head. "You'll see soon enough," she said. Mark led Anna to the room, and as the door clicked shut behind them, the sense of being watched didn't dissipate, it intensified. Through the thin walls, strange sounds drifted, footsteps in the hallway that didn't belong to any guest, whispers too faint to understand. A scratching at the window that seemed impossibly soft, yet deliberate. Anna pressed her ear to the door, trying to locate the source, but only silence stared back at her. Night fell, fully swallowing the motel in darkness. They tried to sleep, but exhaustion was no match for the creeping dread that the stranger's presence inspired. Every creak, every sigh of the building, every rustle of the wind became a potential threat. Mark checked the locks multiple times, convinced they were somehow insufficient. And then, just as the first tendrils of sleep began to take hold, the phone in the room rang. A single shrill ring that echoed unnaturally in the confined space. Mark and Anna froze. Neither had heard the bell yet, neither had expected a call. Mark picked up his hand, trembling. Silence on the other end, then a low, deliberate voice. "In closer than you think." The line went dead. Anna's scream pierced the room, sharp and frantic. Mark grabbed her, trying to calm her shaking body, but the message had already sunk in. The stranger wasn't just outside the room, he had infiltrated their sense of safety, their perception of reality itself. And no matter how far they ran, no matter where they hid, he would find them. Outside, the parking lot remained empty, except for the shadowed corner where he had stood before. But now he was gone, or maybe he was inside. Or maybe he was always everywhere at once. Their eyes met, and in that silent, horrifying exchange, they both understood this nightmare had only just begun. The next morning, the motel was suffused with a deceptive calm, a gray light filtering through the thin curtains. Anna and Mark moved cautiously, their movements synchronized as if rehearsed in fear. Neither spoke, words felt inadequate, too heavy with the weight of the night before. Mark peeked out the window. The parking lot appeared empty, almost ordinary, yet every shadow seemed to twitch with a hidden presence. The stranger was nowhere in sight, but that absence felt deliberate, a calculated pause before the next move in this terrifying game. Anna's stomach churned, each beat echoing the warning that danger was still near. They decided to leave, to escape the oppressive tension that had wrapped the motel like a suffocating shroud. But as they loaded the car, Anna noticed something that froze her blood. Faint footprints pressed into the soft gravel near their vehicle, perfectly aligned with the stranger's known path from the previous day. The prince stopped abruptly, as if he had vanished mid-step. Mark tried to reassure her, "It's probably just someone else." He muttered, but even he didn't believe it. The unease clung to him, and every instinct screamed that they were still being watched. The highway was a gray ribbon stretching into the distance, each mile seeming to prolong their dread rather than relieve it. The radio crackling intermittently offered no comfort. Static hissed like whispers in an abandoned tunnel, and then, out of the corner of Anna's eye, she saw him, a fleeting shadow, on the roadside, standing motionless, staring directly at them. "Stop," she shouted, gripping Mark's arm, but it was too late. The stranger's gaze seemed to pierce through the windshield, and with a motion that defied comprehension, he was gone again, swallowed by the fog. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional sigh of tires on asphalt and the hum of the engine. Every rest stop was empty, every gas station shuttered. It was as if the world itself had been abandoned, leaving them alone on a highway that twisted reality and distorted time. At a remote overlook, they stopped to stretch the landscape around them, eerily quiet. The valley below was cloaked in mist, trees leaning in strange angles, their branches clawing at the fog. Mark's phone, still without signal, buzzed unexpectedly, a single cryptic text message. "You can't hide." Anna's hands shook as she read it aloud. "Who is she?" started, but Mark silenced her with a look. The message was familiar in tone, chilling in its simplicity. The stranger was closer than they had ever imagined, and somehow, he knew exactly where they were. Night descended again, faster than usual, swallowing the horizon in ink-black darkness. They drove cautiously, every headlight reflection a potential threat, every movement in the shadows a harbinger of danger. And then, without warning, the car sputtered and died, stranded in the middle of an isolated road. Panic set in. Mark tried to restart the engine, but it was futile. The fog rolled in thicker, swallowing the edges of the world. And then they saw him emerging from the gray like a phantom, standing on the roadside, motionless, arms at his sides, his eyes fixed on them. Anna wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Mark locked the doors, but the sense of impending intrusion was suffocating. The stranger's presence was no longer just a threat. It was a tangible force pressing against their reality. A distant howl echoed through the mist, the sound too human to ignore, too unnatural to classify. It came closer, blending with the whisper of the wind, and the hairs on Anna's neck stood on end. Every instinct told them to run, yet their car wouldn't move, trapped in the isolation of the unknown. And then the headlights of another vehicle appeared in the fog, cutting through the gray like a knife. Relief surged briefly, but as the car approached, its shape warped. The lights flickered erratically, and for a split second, Mark could have sworn the stranger was driving it. The vehicle passed, leaving only the lingering tension in its wake. Anna and Mark stared at each other, understanding without words. Whatever had begun was far from over. They were no longer merely being followed, they were being hunted, and the highway itself had become a labyrinth designed for their terror. The night seemed endless, stretching like a living thing around their stranded car. Mark and Anna huddled inside, each heartbeat echoing like a drum of impending doom. The fog pressed close, thickening with every passing minute, muting sound and bending light until reality itself seemed to blur. Mark tried the engine again, fumbling with the keys as if the action alone could will it to life. Nothing. The car remained dead, a metal coffin in the middle of a deserted road. Anna's eyes darted to the edges of the fog, searching for any sign of movement, any clue of where the stranger might be. Her hands trembled, cold sweat tracing down her spine. Then from the mist came the faintest sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, measured. They circled the car, tracing invisible lines around it, every step sending chills racing through their veins. Mark peered through the rearview mirror, but the fog obscured everything. The footsteps stopped, leaving an unbearable silence in their wake. A tapping on the passenger side window made Anna jump. She froze, holding her breath as Mark turned slowly. Outside, the stranger's face appeared for the briefest instant, expressionless, pale eyes black and unblinking. And then, just as suddenly, he was gone, vanished into the fog as if he had never been there at all. "This isn't real," Mark whispered, though even he didn't believe it. "It can't be real." But the evidence was undeniable, the lingering cold, the footprints pressed into the gravel, the sense of a presence that defied explanation. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the intermittent Howling of distant animals, each sound magnified by the isolation around them. Dawn threatened to break the night, but the fog remained thick and suffocating. Refusing to lift, Mark finally suggested they try to leave on foot, hoping to reach a main road or a place with signal. Stepping outside, every noise was magnified. Leaves rustled unnaturally, and the fog seemed to coil around them, alive with unseen eyes. Each step forward felt like a march through a dream turned nightmare. Anna's grip on Mark's arm was iron tight, her knuckles white, but neither dared speak lest the sound draw attention. Then, without warning, a figure appeared ahead of them on the road. The stranger. He stood motionless, his posture unnerving in its perfection, like a statue carved from shadow. As they approached cautiously, he tilted his head almost inquisitively, then vanished into the mist once more. Mark and Anna pressed on, heartbeats pounding, adrenaline surging. Every step felt like a victory and a sentence simultaneously, carrying them further into uncertainty. The forest around them shifted, shadows lengthening unnaturally, and whispers of wind sounded eerily like voices. Suddenly, a glimmer caught Anna's eye, a discarded notebook lying half buried in the dirt. She picked it up with trembling hands. Inside were pages filled with the stranger's meticulous observations, names, dates, descriptions of the gas station encounter, and even predictions of their movements. Every detail unerringly accurate, every word a reflection of events that had already transpired. This is insane," Anna whispered, unable to tear her eyes from the pages. The realization hit them both with crushing weight. He had been planning this, watching them far longer than they had ever known. They were trapped in a narrative already written by someone who thrived in fear. A sudden sound behind them, branches snapping, heavy footsteps, made them whirl around. The stranger emerged again, closer than ever, his presence radiating an inescapable menace. Mark grabbed Anna, pulling her into the shadows of the trees, praying they could evade him. For what felt like an eternity, they ran blindly, the fog swallowing their vision, until they stumbled onto an abandoned cabin. Its structure was weathered, paint peeling, windows shattered. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay, and the silence was almost welcoming. They barricaded the door with whatever they could find, hearts pounding, ears straining for the slightest sound. But no matter how far he might be, the sense of his presence lingered like smoke that couldn't be dispersed. The notebook rested on a rickety table between them, a grim reminder of how thoroughly they had been observed. Outside, the fog shifted again. Mark and Anna realized with sinking horror that the stranger wasn't just following, they had been guided into this trap. Every decision, every movement, every instinct had been manipulated. The forest itself felt like a labyrinth designed to keep them running, to keep them afraid. And as night fell, once more the first whispers reached their ears, low, indecipherable murmurs carried on the wind. They seemed to call out their names, teasing the edges of comprehension, promising that their ordeal was far from over. Anna pressed herself against the wall, notebook clutched to her chest. "He knows we are here," she whispered. "He knows everything." Mark nodded silently, his jaw tight. "And we are running out of time." From the shadows, a pair of eyes glimmered, unblinking, unyielding, and impossibly close. The stranger had found them once more, and this time escape seemed almost impossible. The night felt suffocating, pressing in from all sides as Mark and Anna huddled inside the decrepit cabin. Outside, the fog moved like a living thing, twisting around the trees, shifting with unnatural purpose. Every sound, the snapping of a twig, the whisper of wind through broken panes, felt magnified like a signal, marking their exact location. The notebook lay open on the table, pages fluttering in the draft. Each word seemed more sinister than the last, documenting not just their movements but the smallest nuances, the tremor in Anna's hand, Mark's tendency to check the rearview mirror, their subconscious decisions that had led them straight into the stranger's trap. And then the footsteps returned, not from outside, but from within the cabin itself. Every floorboard groaned as if announcing the arrival of something malevolent. The air grew colder, denser, each breath a struggle. Mark grabbed a piece of shattered wood, holding it like a shield, while Anna clutched the notebook as if it could protect them. A shadow moved near the corner of the room, stretching impossibly long across the floor. The stranger's figure emerged, his face hidden in darkness, eyes glinting with a chilling calm. He stepped closer, silent and precise, each movement deliberate. "You should not have come here," a voice whispered, low and unnerving. It did not carry menace, it carried inevitability, a certainty that they were already ensnared. Mark and Anna exchanged a glance, realizing the truth. There was no escaping him. Every route, every plan, every desperate attempt to flee had led them to this moment. The forest, the cabin, even the fog, it was all part of a design they could not comprehend. The stranger raised his hand and the world seemed to hold its breath. A cold wind swept through the cabin, flipping the pages of the notebook as if it had a will of its own. The last entry was different, blank, except for a single sentence: "They are ready now." A sudden noise erupted from the cabin's far wall, a crash of wood splintering, a shadow darting past the broken windows. Mark lunged forward, but Anna pulled him back. It was impossible to know what was real, what was imagined. The stranger did not move, did not speak. He simply watched, patient, inevitable. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into an eternity, and then, as if drawn by some unseen command, the fog outside began to swirl violently, forming shapes that were almost human. The whispers returned louder, echoing through the cabin and into their very minds, repeating words they could not understand, but felt deep in their bones. "You belong here. You belong here." Panic surged. Mark grabbed Anna's hand, pulling her toward the door, only to find it locked. Impossible to open. Windows were barred by nothing visible, yet impenetrable. Every exit was gone, erased, leaving only the cabin and the stranger, and then silence. The fog lifted slightly, revealing the stranger standing in the center of the room. His movements were almost ceremonial as he extended a hand toward them. In that instant, Mark and Anna understood the chase had been over for hours, maybe days, or maybe longer. They had been ensnared in a nightmare that had no end. The last thing they saw before the world seemed to tilt and warp was the stranger's face, calm and expressionless, a mask of inevitability. And then darkness swallowed everything. Somewhere far from the cabin, the gas station remained empty, silent, as if the events that had transpired never existed. But those who know the tale whisper warnings: beware the stranger who watches the footsteps in the fog, the notebook that writes itself. He is patient, and he is always waiting for the next victim. If you found yourself on edge, imagining the fog and the unseen watcher, remember the story does not end here. There are countless mysteries out there, hiding in shadows, waiting to be discovered. If you want more chilling tales like this one, stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new true crime mystery. Stay vigilant and always watch the shadows.